Today's story is about three unsettling murder cases that reveal the darker side of humanity. A journalist loses her life under horrifying circumstances aboard a unique vessel. A woman's disappearance leads to a shocking discovery involving a piece of heavy equipment, and a young traveler's life is tragically cut short while exploring a new country. These stories are as haunting as they are unforgettable. But before we dive into these cases, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you're in the right place. That's all we do, and we upload daily. So, if that sounds like your thing, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Alright, let's get into today's story. Grace Millane arrived in New Zealand full of excitement, another thrilling stop on her dream adventure across the world. A young woman with a bright future, Grace had left her home in England months earlier, eager to experience the vast beauty and culture of distant places. She had already toured parts of Asia and Australia, sharing glimpses of her travels online, showcasing her zest for life, curiosity, and love for new friendships. By December 2018, New Zealand was the next destination. She explored the country's breathtaking landscapes and vibrant cities, immersing herself in the heart of Auckland's lively scenes. It was a place that offered endless wonders to explore, from lush green hillsides to bustling streets filled with people from all walks of life. Grace eagerly took in these sights and sounds, blending in as she relished her independence. One night, while scrolling through a dating app, she matched with a young man. They quickly exchanged messages and agreed to meet on December 1. This wasn't her first time meeting someone new on her travels. Grace was social, confident, and open to experiencing local culture through new acquaintances. They made plans to meet that evening, with no hint of anything unusual or any reason to suspect that her friendly gesture would lead her into danger. That evening, Grace and her date met in the busy streets of central Auckland, joining crowds of people unwinding at bars and restaurants. The pair was spotted on CCTV laughing and chatting, appearing like any other couple enjoying each other's company. They visited several popular spots, mingling and soaking up the vibrant nightlife. Grace seemed to be having a great time. She looked comfortable and at ease, wrapped up in the energy of the evening. As the night progressed, Gracie's family back home in England would never have imagined that this meeting would be her last. When she didn't call home as usual, concerns started to grow. Maui, ni shasa. And Erwalkidi, ni pirji, I say. Grace was known for staying in touch, updating her family regularly about her travels, and ensuring they knew she was safe. The silence from her end was unlike her, but her family hoped it was just a case of poor cell service or a busy schedule. As the hours passed, worry crept in, leaving her loved ones uneasy, thousands of miles away. In Auckland, however, police weren't yet aware of Grace's absence. She was just another tourist among many, until she failed to check out of her hotel on schedule. Her family, becoming more anxious with every passing hour, reported her missing. The New Zealand police, aware of the risks foreign tourists can face, took the report seriously. They quickly launched an investigation, pulling together the initial pieces of Grace's recent activity. Detectives scoured her social media, reviewed her travel records, and began constructing a timeline of her last known movements. As they pieced together her steps, they began focusing on her activities the night she met with her date. CCTV footage showed them entering her date's apartment building later that evening. It would be the last time Grace was seen alive. Once the footage was identified, the young man she had met became the primary focus of the investigation. When police reached out to him, he appeared cooperative, agreeing to meet with officers to discuss the night he'd spent with Grace. He recalled parts of the evening, claiming they'd shared drinks and conversation, later going to his apartment where, he alleged, she decided to leave on her own. But details didn't quite add up, and police sensed inconsistencies in his story. The investigators pressed for more details, hoping to fill in the blanks. Behind the scenes, the forensic team began examining Grace's belongings left in her hotel room, searching for anything that could explain her whereabouts or shed light on her last night. Grace's parents waited helplessly from afar, hoping against all odds for her safe return, clinging to memories of her laughter, her passion for adventure, and her kindness that had touched so many. The investigation grew intense as authorities collected further evidence, including messages exchanged between Grace and her date. With mounting pressure, he soon revised his account, revealing an unsettling turn in his version of events. Yet, while he spoke in vague terms, evidence was beginning to surface, evidence that told a different story than the one he tried to craft. As detectives delved deeper into Grace's last known movements, the investigation began to uncover hidden layers surrounding her disappearance. The man she had met was now central to the inquiry. He had provided a version of events that seemed straightforward at first, but gaps in his story led investigators to suspect there was more beneath the surface. At the Auckland police station, detectives worked around the clock, scouring CCTV footage and retracing Grace's steps on the night of December 1. With each hour, the case took on a more ominous tone, and officers were increasingly determined to bring answers to her worried family. Investigators scanned surveillance videos from city streets and businesses, piecing together a clearer picture of the evening. As they examined footage from the apartment building, they saw Grace entering with her date, yet there was no sign of her leaving. The footage raised immediate red flags, leading authorities to seek a warrant to search the young man's apartment. This step was pivotal. Officers knew that what they might uncover there could either confirm or dispel the dark suspicions that had begun to form. When officers arrived at his apartment, they were prepared for a thorough search, hoping to find something, anything, that would provide clarity. Inside, the small, modest apartment held a chilling silence. Detectives scoured every inch of the space, noticing minor details and carefully logging evidence. Then, in the search of his apartment, they found physical evidence that painted a troubling picture. Back at the station, the suspect was once again brought in for questioning. This time, his composure faltered. He fidgeted, struggled to maintain eye contact, and gave inconsistent answers, leading investigators to press him further. In response to the mounting evidence, he soon admitted that something had gone wrong that night. Yet, as he recounted the events, his explanation remained vague, sidestepping critical details and skirting around key questions. Detectives were left with even more questions, now facing the task of discerning fact from fiction. The forensic team collected samples and analyzed items from the apartment, a methodical process that took hours but was crucial to reconstructing the final moments of Grace's life. Each new discovery seemed to deepen the gravity of the situation. Detectives were more convinced than ever that the truth was hidden within the layers of the suspect's shifting account. Soon after, the police were able to access the man's digital records, including text messages and recent online activity. What they found was both disturbing and crucial, showing that in the hours following Grace's disappearance, he had been online, researching topics that suggested he was concealing much more than he had initially disclosed. The evidence left investigators with little doubt that they were facing a tragic and deliberate incident. The grim findings were a turning point. By this time, word of Grace's disappearance had spread widely, and local media began to cover the story, alerting the public to the investigation. Meanwhile, Grace's family held on to hope, anxiously awaiting news from the police. Detectives knew they had to proceed with care, both for the sake of the investigation and to respect the family's anguish. As the investigation progressed, details from Grace's date's online activity painted an unsettling picture of his mindset, revealing a morbid curiosity that alarmed authorities. Each new piece of evidence brought the case closer to resolution, yet it was clear to investigators that the young man had carefully orchestrated his actions following their encounter. With the evidence mounting, the police prepared to lay charges against the suspect, setting the stage for a dramatic legal battle. Inside the sterile, meticulous walls of the forensic laboratory, each piece of evidence gathered from the suspect's apartment was examined with precision. Specialists sifted through the smallest details, knowing that each item could hold the key to understanding what had happened to Grace. As they carefully analyzed traces from the apartment, the team began to uncover more definitive links connecting the suspect to the disturbing events of that night. Meanwhile, detectives continued their interrogation, observing the suspect's shifting expressions and body language as he gave new, varied explanations. With every question, he hesitated, as if calculating his responses. His accounts grew inconsistent, contradicting his previous statements. He attempted to downplay events and sidestep critical details, but detectives remained composed, waiting patiently as his defenses gradually unraveled. In the apartment search, one discovery stood out: microscopic evidence that linked Grace to the room in undeniable ways. Forensic experts discovered patterns that indicated a struggle had taken place, amplifying the detectives' suspicions. Additionally, signs suggested attempts to cover up what had happened, with forensic residues indicating efforts to erase physical traces in the room. Investigators now had reason to believe that the suspect's story was more of a crafted tale meant to obscure, rather than reveal the truth. With the evidence mounting, the suspect was again brought into the interrogation room, where detectives intensified their questioning. They confronted him with the inconsistencies in his statements and presented him with the physical evidence. Under the weight of this pressure, his story began to crumble further. Attempting to explain the new findings, he hesitantly recounted more of the night's events but continued to twist the narrative to minimize his involvement. Back at the lab, experts combed through his digital records, meticulously examining his online searches and messages, hoping to uncover his true intentions. Investigators were particularly struck by records of internet searches that indicated premeditation, searches that raised more questions than answers. This digital trail now formed a critical piece of the puzzle, revealing behavior that pointed to deeper, troubling intentions. The police understood that while physical evidence could outline a scene, motives and mindset were equally crucial for the case. Forensic psychologists began to analyze his behaviors and statements, piecing together a profile of a person who might go to great lengths to hide the truth. His actions, carefully examined, painted a picture that contradicted his earlier claims of innocence. Meanwhile, the team pieced together a full forensic timeline of the events, pinpointing the exact sequence of movements that had occurred within the suspect's apartment. Combined with the disturbing findings from his digital records, this timeline strengthened the case. Detectives now had a cohesive narrative that placed Grace and the suspect together, contradicted his story, and supported an intentional sequence of actions aimed at concealing the truth. The depth of this evidence left no doubt in the minds of the investigators. Confident they had pieced together a comprehensive case, they prepared to present their findings and take the next steps toward justice for Grace. The trial drew national and international attention as journalists, locals, and curious spectators gathered to witness the legal proceedings unfold. In the courtroom, every seat was taken, and an air of anticipation and gravity filled the space. For Grace's family, who had traveled from England, each day in court was both a painful reminder and a necessary step towards seeking justice for their daughter. They sat quietly, holding back emotions as they faced the man accused of ending Grace's life. The prosecution opened with a detailed account of the evidence gathered, setting the stage for a powerful case. The lead prosecutor meticulously outlined the timeline of events, drawing on the physical and digital evidence recovered from the suspect's apartment and online records. They emphasized the moments captured on CCTV that showed Grace's last known movements and how the suspect's account failed to align with the forensic findings. It was clear that every detail was crafted to leave no room for ambiguity, presenting the jurors with an unsettling narrative of what had likely taken place that night. Witnesses took the stand, one by one. Forensic experts explained their analysis in plain terms, breaking down complex evidence for the jury and revealing how every piece fit into the broader picture of that night. Their testimony illustrated a chilling reconstruction, connecting the physical traces in the apartment to specific moments of the suspect's timeline. Each scientific finding was delivered with precision, leaving the jury to piece together a narrative that was harder and harder to dismiss. Digital evidence played a prominent role in the prosecution's case. The online searches and recent web history presented a disturbing pattern of research, contradicting the suspect's claims and pointing toward premeditated intent. Prosecutors highlighted how these searches, occurring just hours before and after Grace's disappearance, shed light on a calculated mindset, painting a picture that went beyond a simple encounter gone wrong. With each revelation, the jury could sense the depth of the planning involved, and the prosecution argued that these were not random actions but intentional steps. The defense, in turn, attempted to challenge the narrative, presenting their own set of witnesses and explanations. They aimed to discredit some of the forensic interpretations, casting doubt on specific findings and suggesting alternative interpretations. The defense argued that Gracie's death was accidental, attempting to shift the responsibility away from the suspect. Their witnesses, including acquaintances of the accused, painted him as a misunderstood individual who had found himself in a tragic situation. But as each point was raised, the prosecution was prepared, countering every claim with hard evidence. Throughout the trial, Grace's family listened, often with visible emotion, as the attorneys sparred over details, both large and small. The prosecutor's relentless pursuit of truth clashed with the defense's attempts to introduce doubt, resulting in tense exchanges that left the courtroom captivated. The defense's arguments appeared to weaken as the prosecution continued to connect each piece of evidence back to their case's central claim, creating a narrative that left little room for alternative explanations. In closing arguments, the prosecutor passionately summarized the evidence, appealing to the jury's sense of justice and urging them to consider the facts presented over the past weeks. They reminded the jury of the meticulous digital record, the physical evidence, and the inconsistencies in the accused's story. They asked the jurors to see Grace's family's pain and to consider the reality of what had happened that night, pushing them to reach a verdict that would provide closure for her loved ones. The defense made a final attempt to emphasize doubt, focusing on any ambiguities left in the evidence, but the weight of the prosecution's case loomed large. The courtroom fell silent as the jury was instructed to deliberate, tasked with determining the truth from the many accounts they had heard. With emotions running high, the anticipation of the jury's decision marked the beginning of the end of a harrowing journey toward justice. As the jury filed back into the courtroom, the silence was profound. Weeks of evidence, hours of testimony, and countless pages of forensic reports all came down to this moment. Grace's family sat with bated breath, holding on to one another, as the foreperson prepared to read the verdict. The eyes of the room fixed on the defendant, whose expression shifted subtly as he awaited his fate. When the foreperson declared the guilty verdict, a wave of relief and restrained emotion washed over Grace's family. They held back tears, shoulders trembling as they acknowledged the decision they had hoped for, though it could never truly make up for their loss. Around the courtroom, there was a collective sense of justice served, a quiet understanding that the legal system had done its part to honor Grace's memory. The sentencing followed shortly after. The judge delivered stern words, condemning the harm done and the suffering inflicted on Grace and her loved ones. His message was clear. Actions have consequences, and this case would serve as a reminder to society. The sentence brought some comfort to Grace's family, a small solace amid their grief, knowing that the truth had come to light and accountability had been established. In the days following the trial, people around the world reflected on the story of Grace Mullane, her life, and the dangers that can sometimes accompany an open-hearted approach to meeting new people. The media coverage prompted public conversations about safety, the digital age, and the ways in which technology shapes interactions among strangers. Grace's story, now widely known, became a catalyst for change, sparking discussions on how people might better protect themselves and others in a world where boundaries between online and offline interactions can blur. For Grace's family, returning home was both a relief and a stark reminder of her absence. They were faced with the bittersweet task of preserving her memory while moving forward. They turned their grief into advocacy, sharing her story to raise awareness and inspire safer practices for young travelers, urging others to honor her adventurous spirit responsibly. Over time, Grace's case became a touchstone, a reminder of the importance of empathy, caution, and accountability. Her story inspired discussions and initiatives to make travel and social interactions safer, particularly for young people. Grace Mullane's memory remained, not only as a beautiful soul taken too soon, but as a reminder to live boldly while also safeguarding one's well-being in an ever-connected world. The next story is called A Deadly Voyage. Kim Wall stepped onto the deck of the UC-3 Nautilus, Peter Madsen's homemade submarine, ready to document what was supposed to be another fascinating story in her career as an award-winning journalist. Known for covering unique stories around the world, she had arranged to meet Madsen to interview him about his career and latest projects. It was late August 2017, and the evening was calm as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a deep amber light over the waters near Copenhagen. For Kim, who had ventured into numerous challenging situations, this interview was set to be one more adventure. Friends and colleagues knew Kim as a meticulous journalist who took her craft seriously. She had been following Madsen's work for some time, intrigued by the eccentric inventor who had become something of a local celebrity due to his bold claims and ambitious dreams. Known for his boundary-pushing projects and distinct personality, Madsen had gained significant attention in the media, both as an engineer and as a bold visionary. This submarine, the Nautilus, was part of his public persona, a testament to his daring nature and audacious pursuits. As the hatch closed behind them, Kim prepared to dive into her interview, her questions designed to reveal Madsen's unique worldview and ambitions. However, the atmosphere soon grew tense. Madsen, who was known for his intense personality, seemed unpredictable that evening. While they discussed his submarine, Kim likely sensed something unsettling, though it was unclear what her thoughts were as they moved below deck. Hours passed, and by late evening, as her partner back on shore waited to hear from her, Kim had yet to respond. Around midnight, worry set in among Kim's friends and family, especially when her boyfriend, who was supposed to meet her later, hadn't heard anything. This silence was uncharacteristic of Kim. She was diligent about keeping those closest to her informed, especially when she was reporting. As morning approached with no word from her, concerns deepened, and her friends contacted the authorities, triggering what would become a high-profile search. By the early hours of August 11, the Danish Navy was notified, and efforts began to locate the missing submarine. Reports started circulating that Madsen had also failed to communicate with his team. Finally, on August 11th, the Nautilus was spotted off the coast, partially submerged in the water. Madsen was seen on the surface, waving to rescuers as they approached. However, there was no sign of Kim. As Madsen was brought ashore, he immediately caught the attention of both law enforcement and journalists, who gathered to cover what had quickly become a major news event. Standing among the throng of onlookers, he offered an unsettling account. He claimed that he had dropped Kim off on shore the previous night, and that the submarine had suffered a technical malfunction, forcing him to abandon it. His story appeared to change, however, when further questioned, first hinting at an accident, then claiming that she had encountered a malfunction on board. Authorities quickly identified inconsistencies in Madsen's statements. They knew that finding answers would not be easy, given that Kim's whereabouts were still unknown, and Madsen's claims seemed increasingly improbable. Danish investigators intensified the search around the harbor and nearby areas, hoping for clues about what had happened during those crucial hours aboard the submarine. On August 21st, search teams made a grim discovery along the coast, leading to the heartbreaking confirmation that the remains they had found belonged to Kim Wall. The news sent shockwaves through her family, her community, and her colleagues around the world. It was a devastating blow to those who knew her as a dedicated, compassionate journalist who used her platform to tell the stories of the unheard and unseen. The public, too, was shaken, as the case began unfolding on a scale that would reveal disturbing details about her final hours. As the investigation pressed forward, Madsen became the primary suspect. Evidence gathered from the wreck of the submarine suggested a scene of struggle. Investigators found that specific items, critical to piecing together what had happened, had been removed or damaged, a discovery that only deepened their suspicions. Forensic experts, working alongside the Danish police, meticulously analyzed each piece of evidence recovered from the submarine and surrounding waters. They studied Madsen's changing narratives and uncovered a disturbing timeline of events that offered chilling insights into what Kim had likely endured. Police continued their search, combing through the waters and nearby coastlines for more evidence, while Madsen remained under close scrutiny. His actions, both during and after the incident, raised red flags, and the inconsistencies in his stories painted a picture that was both tragic and troubling. Investigators meticulously documented their findings, each revelation pushing the case further into the public spotlight and prompting renewed calls for justice. The investigation quickly picked up momentum, as authorities continued their meticulous examination of the evidence linked to Kim's disappearance and the subsequent discovery of her remains. The media and public watched closely as details emerged, each new piece of information only heightening the shock and sorrow felt by those who followed Kim's work or knew her personally. Police had initially approached Madsen's story with caution, yet as contradictions and gaps in his explanations continued to surface, it became clear that his accounts warranted closer scrutiny. With each new inconsistency, law enforcement officers pressed Madsen further, observing his reactions closely. It became evident that he wasn't merely an eccentric inventor caught in a tragic accident, but possibly involved in something darker. Investigators focused on the timeline he had provided, comparing it with verified data from witnesses and digital sources. Kim's last known location, as well as Madsen's movements during and after their time aboard the submarine, became key points of analysis. Digital forensics experts meticulously reviewed data from nearby GPS tracking systems, hoping to narrow down the route the submarine had taken. Using information from navigation logs and communication signals, they created a detailed map of Madsen's route. piecing together a timeline that would either verify his story or reveal its flaws. Their analysis showed that Madsen's submarine had indeed taken an erratic path, not in line with his initial claim that he had dropped Kim off safely. The trajectory revealed unplanned stops, causing investigators to suspect that something critical had occurred during these moments. Simultaneously, the forensic team conducted a thorough examination of the wrecked submarine, which had been raised from the seabed for analysis. While partially damaged from being underwater, the vessel still held significant clues. Investigators sifted through every compartment and examined the surfaces for biological traces, hoping to uncover physical evidence that might indicate a struggle. They documented and analyzed every mark, stain, and unusual feature in the cramped vessel, looking for insights into what had taken place during Kim's time on board. At the same time, Madsen's behavior continued to raise suspicion. As forensic evidence began to reveal more, he offered new explanations in response to the police's questions. This changing narrative only fueled the investigation, as each new version contradicted previous accounts, forcing investigators to untangle his statements from the facts. His explanations included a variety of improbable scenarios, each of which left authorities more convinced that he was concealing something significant. In a breakthrough moment, forensic experts found evidence on the submarine that pointed toward the deliberate use of tools. This discovery was a grim confirmation of police suspicions. It suggested that the harm Kim endured had not been accidental. The intensity of this revelation prompted law enforcement to accelerate their efforts to secure additional evidence. Using advanced forensic techniques, investigators continued examining biological samples and any traces of clothing, equipment, or personal effects that might have been overlooked. Their findings not only contradicted Madsen's statements, but further exposed the deliberate nature of his actions, shedding new light on the final moments of Kim's life. As word of these findings reached the media, the case gained widespread attention across Denmark and internationally. Journalists, former colleagues, and friends of Kim's spoke out about her commitment to her work and the heartbreak of her tragic loss. While some expressed horror at the emerging details, others focused on honoring her legacy, sharing stories of her compassionate journalism and determination to uncover truths others often overlook. For Kim's loved ones, the findings brought an agonizing mix of sorrow and anger. Her family, who had watched her grow into a driven and talented journalist, now faced the grim reality of her fate. The Danish public, too, began grappling with the deeper implications of the case. This wasn't simply a tragic incident, but a reminder of the dangers that journalists sometimes face, even when pursuing stories that seem, on the surface, routine. As the case advanced, authorities continued gathering every possible piece of evidence to ensure a thorough investigation. As authorities uncovered more evidence, the search expanded beyond the immediate area where the submarine was recovered. A dedicated team of divers and forensic analysts scoured the waters and shoreline, hoping to recover any remaining evidence that could complete the picture of what had occurred. Their efforts were soon rewarded. Along the coast, additional discoveries were made that linked unmistakably to Kim. Each new finding was carefully cataloged and analyzed, forming a growing body of evidence that painted a clearer, more harrowing image of her last hours. In the lab, forensic teams worked tirelessly, utilizing advanced techniques to confirm the identity of each piece of evidence. Experts analyzed every sample, even the smallest trace material, to ensure nothing was overlooked. The discoveries they made continued to support the investigators' suspicions, adding weight to the increasingly disturbing theory that Kim's final moments were not the result of an accident, but of something far more intentional. Meanwhile, Madsen's responses to questioning evolved, now containing elements that diverged significantly from his original statements. These changes in his story caught the attention of both investigators and the public, as each new explanation contradicted his previous assertions. Detectives noted his behavior in these interviews, observing his reactions closely, searching for indicators that might reveal further insight into his motives and state of mind. Madsen's unpredictable responses, combined with forensic evidence that continued to contradict his accounts, solidified the authorities' determination to hold him accountable. The evidence became even more unsettling when experts identified signs that pointed to specific preparations made aboard the submarine. This detail, which emerged from analysis of items found on board, implied a calculated element to the events leading up to the incident. Specialists in criminal psychology and forensic behavior were brought into the investigation to assess Madsen's actions and evaluate the mindset that could have led to this tragic event. These specialists offered their insights, which suggested that what transpired aboard the submarine might have been premeditated, leading to even more disturbing conclusions. Outside the lab, the investigation's findings attracted heightened attention from the public and international media. Journalists covered the case with intensity, dissecting each new revelation, while people worldwide grappled with the reality of what had happened. Tributes poured in, as colleagues and admirers of Kim's work honored her memory, sharing stories that reflected her passion for storytelling and her unwavering commitment to exposing hidden truths. The tragedy of her passing felt universal, as many recognized the risks that come with reporting on complex subjects, even in places considered relatively safe. For Kim's family, the investigation's findings brought unimaginable grief, but also a sense of resolve. They were determined to see justice served for their daughter, who had inspired countless others with her fearless pursuit of stories that mattered. Their quiet strength became a poignant reminder of Kim's own courage, inspiring those who followed the case to advocate for journalists' safety and the importance of free, unencumbered reporting. With mounting evidence, investigators gathered everything necessary for a strong case. As the forensic team compiled its final reports, the focus shifted toward the impending legal proceedings. The meticulous work of each team member, from forensic specialists to investigative officers, had built a compelling case, and the legal system now prepared to hold Madsen accountable. For everyone involved, the mission was clear: to honor Kim's memory by ensuring that every detail of what had happened to her was brought to light and that justice, in all its forms, was pursued to its fullest extent. As the investigation moved closer to trial, the Danish authorities prepared to present their findings in court, where Madsen would face the full extent of the charges against him. Legal experts scrutinized every piece of evidence, building a prosecution case that left little room for ambiguity. They prepared to bring forward a comprehensive narrative of the events, supported by extensive forensic analysis and witness testimony. For both the prosecution and the defense, this would be a high-profile trial, and each side worked to prepare its strategy for the courtroom. At the center of the case was the forensic team's analysis, which had connected numerous pieces of evidence to support a cohesive account of what transpired aboard the submarine. Key experts were called upon to interpret their findings for the court, from specialists in underwater forensics to DNA analysts who had painstakingly verified each sample. Their testimony would be critical in communicating the gravity of the evidence and detailing the circumstances that Kim endured. For the prosecution, these findings illustrated a disturbing level of intent and calculated behavior, underscoring the severity of the charges Madsen faced. Madsen's defense, however, attempted to cast doubt on the forensic interpretations, questioning the validity of certain findings and challenging the prosecution's narrative. His legal team sought to undermine the credibility of the evidence, focusing on technicalities in the forensic process and proposing alternate explanations for specific findings. They aimed to introduce reasonable doubt, suggesting that while the events were undeniably tragic, they could still be the result of an unintended outcome. As the trial progressed, the prosecution presented Madsen's shifting statements as further evidence of his intent to mislead investigators. They argued that his constant revisions were calculated attempts to misrepresent the events and downplay his responsibility. To support this claim, the prosecution introduced testimonies from behavioral analysts who had reviewed recordings of Madsen's interviews. These experts highlighted patterns in his responses, noting behavioral indicators that suggested a purposeful evasion of facts. According to the prosecution, these behaviors, combined with the forensic evidence, pointed toward a deliberate attempt to conceal the truth. The court heard detailed accounts of Kim's dedication to her work, with colleagues and friends providing insight into her character and the importance of her final story. These accounts served as a reminder of the profound loss felt by those who knew her. Testimonies from those close to Kim not only underscored her integrity as a journalist, but also reinforced the need for accountability in the case. As they shared memories of her kindness, determination, and unique perspective, the impact of her absence became palpable, resonating deeply within the courtroom. Forensic psychologists took the stand to discuss Madsen's psychological profile and his motivations. They presented their evaluations, detailing how certain personality traits could align with the prosecution's theory. These evaluations, combined with Madsen's own words and actions, suggested that the events aboard the submarine were not the result of a spontaneous decision, but rather an outcome of deliberate choices. These findings, presented to a captivated courtroom, painted a complex picture of the case, one that underscored the calculated nature of the actions attributed to Madsen. As the closing arguments drew near, the prosecution delivered a resolute final statement, calling for justice on behalf of Kim and her family. They urged the court to consider the overwhelming weight of the evidence, which they argued could lead only to one conclusion. For the family and friends of Kim, who attended each day, the prosecution's closing statement was a powerful and emotional moment, affirming their pursuit of justice for Kim's memory. With closing arguments behind them, the court entered its final phase as the jury deliberated on Madsen's fate. The room fell into a tense silence as people waited for the verdict that would determine whether justice would be served. Kim's family, who had endured each agonizing detail of the trial, sat quietly, their faces reflecting both sorrow and resolve. For them, this moment held the weight of all they had lost and hoped to find in the legal process. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom, and the judge called for silence. The verdict was read, confirming that the evidence had left little room for doubt. Madsen was found guilty, and the sentence handed down reflected the severity of the crime, with the court imposing one of Denmark's most serious penalties. The decision brought a measure of closure to Kim's family, though the pain of her absence was ever present. In the days following the verdict, public reaction to the trial's outcome was profound. People across Denmark, and indeed around the world, reacted to the news with a mixture of relief and sadness. Journalists honored Kim's memory by sharing her past stories and celebrating her dedication to telling the stories that others often overlook. As the legal chapter closed, many focused on preserving her legacy, determined to ensure that her impact would be remembered beyond the tragedy that had taken her life. Kim's family, though forever changed by her loss, found solace in the support that poured in from around the world. They took steps to honor her legacy by establishing scholarships and initiatives for aspiring journalists, aiming to continue her mission of fearless, compassionate storytelling. The initiatives quickly gained momentum, with people from all walks of life contributing in memory of Kim and her commitment to justice and human rights. Her work, characterized by empathy and integrity, inspired those who shared her dedication to seeking truth and uplifting unheard voices. In the journalism community, her story became a reminder of the profession's risks, prompting conversations about safety and support for reporters in challenging environments. Her colleagues, while grieving, used her memory as motivation to push forward in their own work, embracing the values she had embodied. Kim's spirit, as a journalist who fearlessly pursued stories that mattered, lived on in each person she had touched. For the investigators and legal professionals who had worked tirelessly on the case, the outcome represented both justice and a testament to the resilience of those who sought the truth. Their dedication had brought clarity and accountability to a case that might have otherwise remained a mystery. Each person involved felt the impact of Kim's story, recognizing the profound loss, but also the importance of their role in uncovering the truth. As the world moved forward, Kim Wall's story remained etched in the hearts of those who knew her and those who learned of her work. Her memory became a legacy that transcended the tragedy, reminding everyone of the courage, compassion, and commitment to justice that defined her life. The work she left behind continued to inspire, resonating with those who valued the power of storytelling to effect change and bring light to even the darkest corners of human experience. Next and final story is called The Woodchipper Killer. It was a bitterly cold November night in 1986 when Hella Crafts, a devoted flight attendant and mother, vanished from her quiet Connecticut home. Snowflakes drifted in the air as the nor'easter gathered strength, a storm that left the streets slick and visibility low. For friends, family, and co-workers, it was almost unthinkable that someone so rooted in her community, someone so deeply connected to her children, would disappear without a word. But as days passed without a trace, a deep unease settled over the town. Hella's last known whereabouts were traced to her home in Newtown, where she was expected to return after a flight assignment. Her close friend and co-worker, who'd seen her last, recalled Hella's excitement about finally finalizing her decision to separate from her husband, Richard Crafts, a pilot and former police officer. Hella's close friends had known for years that her marriage was troubled, She had endured years of strain and mistrust, and her decision to file for divorce had been a difficult but determined one. She'd confided in her friends, expressing relief at what she hoped would be a fresh start, a safer future for herself and her children. But by the evening of November 19th, her usual, reliable presence was conspicuously absent. Friends, who were used to seeing her at work or catching her on the phone, grew increasingly alarmed. Days turned into tense, unanswered hours, and soon, her friends took action. One co-worker drove to Hella's house, hoping perhaps she was simply recovering from a bout of winter illness, but when no one answered, the creeping fear took hold. Hella's attorney, who had recently filed her divorce papers, was among the first to raise the alarm with authorities, urging them to investigate immediately, given her concerns over Hella's troubled marriage. When the authorities were finally contacted, their first interview was with Hella's husband, Richard. Richard was known to be a quiet, unflinching man, not one to reveal his emotions easily, but his demeanor during questioning raised eyebrows. He claimed Helle had left for Denmark, mentioning her frequent international travels as a flight attendant. Yet those close to her knew that Helle had meticulously planned her life around her children and had no intention of leaving without ensuring their care. Suspicion mounted, especially when neighbors recalled seeing Richard operating a woodchipper near the river, a chilling sight during that icy storm. As the police looked deeper, what they found was troubling. Helle had recently hired a private investigator who had collected photographs and documents that detailed Richard's past infidelities. She had prepared to confront him, and those closest to her feared that the confrontation may have escalated. In an unprecedented move, law enforcement decided to take a closer look around the Crafts' home. The once warm and inviting family home now felt desolate, with traces of a hasty, unusual cleanup. Forensic teams meticulously examined the space, searching for any sign of struggle. Wow. In the bedroom, investigators found faint blood traces, alarming evidence that deepened the mystery of her whereabouts. The stains led to other parts of the home, and it soon became clear that something was very wrong. The evidence, though faint, painted a haunting picture. The Connecticut State Police reached out to forensic experts, knowing that in a case as unusual as this, they would need the best resources available. Step by step, they carefully examined every inch of the Crafts' residence, piece by piece trying to reconstruct what could have happened. Forensic experts began to analyze samples, hoping for a breakthrough. At the same time, the police looked into Richard's recent activities, retracing his movements during the week Helle disappeared. Witnesses began to come forward, each contributing small but significant pieces of information that painted a more complex portrait of Richard's behavior after Helle's disappearance. Then came the pivotal witness testimony from a man who had seen Richard in the early hours of the storm, driving near the river with what appeared to be a large woodchipper. Though the sight was unusual, the man hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now, it seemed to hold sinister significance. As investigators pieced these accounts together, a disturbing pattern emerged. With the blood evidence and witness statements suggesting something far more sinister, the Connecticut State Police expanded their search to the banks of the Housatonic River. The area, blanketed in fresh snow, was eerily quiet as search teams combed through the landscape, looking for any sign of Helle. Their persistence would soon pay off. Near the water's edge, among scattered wood chips and branches, they found a few tiny bone fragments and strands of human hair. These discoveries pointed to the unthinkable, yet there were still so many unanswered questions. The evidence gathered so far was chilling, yet proving it in court without a body would be another monumental challenge. Investigators pressed on, consulting with experts to see if they could definitively tie these fragments to Helle. Bit by bit, they worked to build a case that could finally reveal the truth. As investigators pursued every lead in the search for Helle, the story grew even stranger. Richard Crafts, known for his calm and composed demeanor, was now under intense scrutiny. Despite the mounting evidence, Richard maintained a dispassionate front, sticking to his initial story that Helle had traveled abroad. But the investigators' growing suspicions drove them to search deeper, determined to uncover what really happened on that snowy November night. Detectives began meticulously assembling a timeline. On the day of Helle's disappearance, Richard's movements had been anything but ordinary. Early that morning, he had rented an industrial woodchipper and was seen driving a large truck with it near the riverbank. A strange sight given the freezing temperatures and swirling snow. Eyewitnesses who had spotted him that night were called in for questioning, and their accounts confirmed that something unusual had indeed happened. The witnesses described seeing Richard hauling the woodchipper along the desolate, snow-covered roads, stopping in secluded spots by the river. One local resident recalled feeling uneasy, watching the truck's headlights fade into the night as it pulled off onto a side road. The memory, once dismissed as peculiar but harmless, now weighed heavily on the witness' mind. Forensic teams intensified their search around the riverbank, and every detail was painstakingly cataloged. The frozen ground made the search slow and arduous, but what they uncovered only deepened the mystery. Small fragments of tissue and bone were scattered across the icy banks, embedded in wood chips and twigs. Forensic experts gathered these fragments with extreme care, knowing that each piece held a potential key to understanding Hella's fate. Back at the lab, forensic scientists began piecing together what they had found. The work was delicate, requiring precision to determine if these fragments could be definitively linked to Hella. As they processed the evidence, a grim picture began to emerge, one that the investigators had quietly feared from the beginning. Meanwhile, in the Crafts' home, a team of crime scene specialists conducted more in-depth forensic testing. They employed a powerful luminol solution to detect traces of blood that might have been cleaned up. In several places throughout the home, faint but unmistakable traces of blood glowed under the luminol, revealing a chilling story that paint alone could not hide. These traces, while faint, were more than enough to suggest that an attempt had been made to erase all signs of a struggle. Investigators soon brought in a team of forensic pathologists to help determine the likelihood that these blood traces were connected to the remains by the river. The task was challenging, as the evidence was fragmented and faint, but the experts worked tirelessly, realizing that this case might hinge on their findings. After hours of analysis, they were able to conclude that the evidence strongly suggested a connection to Hell, although they would need more to present a complete case in court. As the forensic case mounted, detectives expanded their interviews, focusing not only on Richard's recent activities, but also on his character and behavior leading up to Hella's disappearance. Neighbors and acquaintances described him as reserved, even detached, often retreating to his own private world. Friends of Helle shared that she had confided in them about her fears and concerns, which painted a starkly different picture of their life together. Helle had often mentioned feeling uneasy, and her closest friends recalled her saying she believed Richard was capable of dangerous behavior. One key piece of evidence emerged from a private investigator Helle had hired prior to her disappearance. She had suspected Richard of infidelity and felt an increasing need to protect herself and her children. The investigator's report contained detailed accounts of Richard's extramarital activities, providing a motive that hinted at the possible lengths he might go to if Hell decided to separate from him permanently. These accounts, though uncomfortable for those close to Hella to hear, began forming a motive that investigators could not ignore. As the investigation continued, detectives faced the daunting challenge of building a case that could stand in court without a traditional body of evidence. They turned to forensic experts in various fields, consulting with anthropologists and pathologists who specialized in piecing together fragmentary remains. The Connecticut State Police also reached out to the FBI, seeking additional expertise to ensure they left no stone unturned. Every shred of evidence was analyzed and cataloged, each piece helping to reinforce the circumstantial but compelling case they were building. Word of the investigation spread throughout the community, casting a somber tone over the normally peaceful town. Friends and family of Hella clung to hope that answers would come, even as the gravity of the evidence pointed to a tragic outcome. Investigators continued to work day and night, knowing that time was of the essence and that every detail could make a difference in understanding the truth of Hella's disappearance. Throughout this grueling search for answers, Richard remained steadfast, brushing off the authorities' interest as little more than a misunderstanding. His lack of emotion struck many as strange, but he continued to lead a relatively normal life, refusing to answer any questions that probed too deeply. This only served to fuel the community's suspicions and added pressure to the case. As more evidence piled up, the detectives felt they were closing in on the truth. They prepared for what would be the most complex trial the town had ever seen, knowing that every detail of their work would soon be put under intense public scrutiny. As winter settled over Connecticut, the case of Helle Craft's disappearance had become a consuming focus for the Connecticut State Police. What had started as a missing persons case was now unmistakably something darker. Armed with fragmented evidence and determined to reveal the truth, investigators continued to unearth pieces of a grim and unsettling story. In their meticulous search, forensic specialists had painstakingly analyzed every item found by the riverbank. The hair strands, bone fragments, and traces of tissue were subjected to rigorous testing. Though initially skeptical of what could be proven without a complete body, forensic analysts knew that each tiny piece held the potential to answer the questions surrounding Hella's fate. With the emerging field of forensic analysis on their side, they worked tirelessly, knowing that their findings would need to be conclusive enough to stand in court. Then, the team made a breakthrough that would shift the course of the investigation entirely. Among the fragments found near the river was a tiny piece of a human tooth, still intact enough for identification. When compared with Hell's dental records, there was no doubt the tooth matched. This single, unmistakable piece of evidence tied Helle Crafts to the scene by the riverbank, providing the investigators with the link they needed. It was a somber moment for everyone involved. Their worst suspicions had been confirmed. But the discovery of Hella's remains was only part of the story. Now, investigators had to piece together the events that had led to such a shocking crime. The police turned their attention back to Richard Crafts, whose behavior in the weeks since Hella's disappearance had only heightened their suspicions. His interactions with neighbors, who described him as calm and unbothered, contrasted sharply with the gravity of the unfolding investigation. As forensic teams continued their examination of the evidence, more details came to light. In addition to the blood found at the Crafts' home, traces of the same blood type were discovered in Richard's car, along with small, muddy footprints leading from the garage to the house. Forensic analysts concluded that these traces indicated an attempt to transport something large and likely concealed from the house to a different location. The findings created a timeline that suggested Helle had not simply left of her own accord, but had been moved. The Woodchipper, which Richard had rented on the night of the storm, was also brought in for forensic examination. Investigators, horrified by the implications, worked carefully to collect samples from the machine. Every part of it was examined, from the metal blades to the internal chute, each centimeter of its surface scoured for any clue that could confirm their suspicions. In one of the grooves near the chute, forensic experts found another tiny, significant piece of evidence, a fiber that matched the fabric of the nightgown Helle had been last seen wearing. This small, haunting detail painted a vivid picture, confirming that Helle had been at the center of a deliberate and shocking crime. With these findings, the detectives' case against Richard Crafts grew stronger by the day. They gathered every statement, every forensic report, and each piece of evidence to prepare for what would be an unprecedented trial. Connecticut prosecutors understood that proving a case without a complete body was rare and legally complex. Yet, they were determined to bring every fragment, every witness, and every fact to light, confident that justice for Helle could be achieved through the painstaking details they had uncovered. One of the most compelling testimonies came from a river worker who had been plowing the snowy banks on the night of Helle's disappearance. This worker recalled seeing a man, matching Richard's description, operating a woodchipper near the water. At the time, the sight had seemed strange given the late hour and poor weather conditions. Now, with the investigation in full swing, the witness account provided a key piece in the timeline that connected the events of that night to the evidence found by the river. Meanwhile, the forensic evidence gathered in the home painted a chilling picture of what had likely happened within the Crafts house in those last hours. Experts identified faint blood spatter patterns in various rooms, each one examined with cutting-edge forensic tools to construct a probable sequence of events. The evidence suggested a struggle had taken place, one that ultimately ended in a quiet yet resolute attempt to erase any trace of what had occurred. As investigators analyzed the data, it was clear that the effort to clean up had been methodical, but not flawless. By the time the case was ready for trial, the community was gripped with a mix of shock and sadness. Helle, known for her kindness and dedication to her family, had vanished under circumstances that now seemed unmistakably calculated. Friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the evidence with the quiet life they had seen her and Richard live. Though the findings had been gruesome and the investigation long, detectives and prosecutors alike remained steadfast in their mission to honor Helle's life and the truth of what had happened. With each piece of evidence aligned, the stage was set for what would be a historic legal battle. As the case against Richard Crafts reached trial, the quiet town of Newtown found itself thrust into the national spotlight. This would be one of the first trials in Connecticut's history, where a conviction was sought without a fully recovered body. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense as both sides prepared to present their cases, with Richard calmly seated at the defense table, his expression unreadable. The prosecution opened with the powerful evidence gathered by the forensic teams. They painstakingly recounted the timeline investigators had established, tying together witness statements, blood evidence, and the grim discoveries along the riverbank. Using projected images, they displayed the fragments found at the crime scene, each one linked to hell through exhaustive forensic analysis. Each detail underscored the gravity of the case, painting a picture that, while incomplete, was deeply convincing. One of the prosecution's most compelling arguments came from the testimony of forensic experts who had worked tirelessly on the case. They described in careful, factual terms how they had identified Hell's remains from the tiny bone fragments, explaining the precise forensic methods used to match the evidence to her dental records. The jury listened intently as each expert testified, carefully explaining the significance of each fragment, each fiber, and each sample collected. Though somber, the testimonies left little doubt about the events of that night, making clear that Hellel Craft's disappearance was not an accident or a mystery. This was a carefully concealed crime. The defense, however, was ready to challenge each piece of evidence, knowing that the lack of a fully intact body left room for doubt. They focused their strategy on questioning the reliability of the forensic evidence and pointing out potential gaps in the investigation. Richard's attorney argued that the river fragments, while suspicious, did not conclusively prove Hella's fate. He emphasized the circumstantial nature of much of the evidence, attempting to create uncertainty about the prosecution's narrative. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement was scrutinized, with the defense urging the jury to consider alternative explanations and the possibility of reasonable doubt. The most intense moments of the trial came during the cross-examinations, as the defense sought to discredit the prosecution's experts. In one dramatic exchange, they questioned the reliability of the dental identification methods used to link the fragments to Helle, suggesting that the evidence could not irrefutably prove her identity. While the forensic team defended their methods, the jury was left to grapple with the inherent challenges of a case built on fragmentary evidence. Despite these challenges, the prosecution presented additional evidence that struck a powerful chord. They introduced the testimony of the river worker, who had seen Richard operating the woodchipper by the river, casting a suspicious shadow over his late-night activities. This witness had no personal connection to the Crafts family, and his account of that night came across as genuine and credible. The river worker's observation served as a key moment in the trial, supporting the prosecution's timeline and bolstering the forensic evidence. In an attempt to humanize the case and convey the emotional weight of the loss, Hella's friends and family were called to the stand. They shared memories of her kindness, her dedication to her children, and her recent concerns about her safety. These accounts painted a vivid picture of Helle, reminding the jury of the person behind the evidence and giving voice to her life and aspirations. Each family member and friend who testified added depth to the case, transforming it from an abstract forensic puzzle to a deeply personal tragedy. Richard's defense continued to argue that the prosecution had not proven his guilt beyond reasonable doubt. They presented him as a stable, disciplined individual with no history of aggression. They underscored his years of service as a pilot and his connections within the community, casting doubt on whether he could be capable of such an act. Yet, the steady accumulation of evidence, both physical and circumstantial, weighed heavily on the jury, leaving them with a difficult choice. As the trial neared its end, the prosecution gave a final, compelling closing argument. They reminded the jury of the immense effort investigators had put forth to uncover the truth, urging them to consider each piece of evidence as part of a greater whole. They emphasized the sacrifices made by Hell's family and friends in the pursuit of justice and painted a picture of the chilling reality investigators had uncovered. The courtroom fell silent as the jury began their deliberation, the weight of the evidence fresh in their minds. Outside, the community held its breath, waiting for what felt like an eternity as the jury debated the case's merits. For Hell's friends and family, the trial had already been an ordeal, but they remained hopeful that justice would prevail. After tense deliberations, the jury returned to the courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Family members, friends, and residents waited in silence as the verdict was read. Richard Crafts was found guilty. The announcement sent waves through the courtroom, and for Hella's loved ones, it marked a bittersweet moment. While nothing could bring her back, they found solace in knowing that her story had been heard and that justice had been served. With the verdict in place, Richard was sentenced, and the court proceedings came to an end. But the trial's outcome marked only the beginning of the story's impact. The case of Helle Crafts became a landmark in criminal law, known as one of the first successful convictions without a fully recovered body. Legal experts and law enforcement across the nation took note, realizing that this case opened doors to future prosecutions that might otherwise have seemed impossible. In the following months, Helle's friends and family worked to piece their lives back together, holding on to their memories of her while trying to move past the haunting details of the trial. Helle's children, supported by close family members, began to rebuild their lives, though the loss of their mother left an enduring void. Helle's absence was felt deeply in the community, with friends and neighbors honoring her memory in small, meaningful ways. Local memorials and quiet tributes reminded everyone of her kindness and strength, and her story became a powerful example of resilience in the face of tragedy. The case itself also left a lasting impact on forensic science. Investigators who had worked tirelessly on Helle's case were lauded for their meticulous and groundbreaking work. Their techniques set new standards for gathering and analyzing forensic evidence, especially in cases where direct evidence was limited. The precision with which they pieced together fragments to tell Helle's story became a model for other departments, helping to shape protocols that would guide forensic investigations for years to come. The landmark nature of the case also drew attention from the media and criminal justice circles alike. Documentaries and legal discussions highlighted the case as a turning point, one that demonstrated the power of science and perseverance in uncovering truth. The story reached beyond Connecticut, resonating with families and communities everywhere, many of whom found inspiration in the dedication of those who fought for justice on Helle's behalf. For the investigators, prosecutors, and community members involved, Helle's case was one that would never be forgotten. Each had been affected by the search for answers, the long hours spent combing through evidence, and the somber reality of the case's outcome. The Connecticut State Police, who had been instrumental in assembling the evidence, took pride in their role, knowing that their work had helped bring closure to Helle's family and prevent further unanswered questions. In the years that followed, Helle's story continued to serve as a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. Her legacy lived on as her friends and family worked to ensure her memory was preserved with dignity. The impact of the trial, both on the legal system and on the wider community, demonstrated the resilience of those who seek justice and the power of persistence in finding answers, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Though her life was cut short, Helle's story remains a powerful reminder of the strength of truth. Her case stood as proof that even in the absence of clear answers, justice could prevail, and her memory would endure as a tribute to the dedication of those who fought to honor her life and reveal the truth of what had happened on that fateful November night. If these stories left you captivated and curious, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to G-Chill Thrills Storyzing for more deep dives into the strange, dark, and mysterious. Hit the notification bell so you never miss one of our daily uploads. We'd love to hear your thoughts, theories, or anything we might have missed, so drop a comment below. Your perspective could spark a whole new discussion. Thank you for watching G-Chill Thrills Storyzing, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep the thrill alive.